I understand you've provided a creative brief for a documentary-style conspiracy narrative. This appears to be a request for fictional script writing in the conspiracy thriller genre, featuring the fictional character Professor Victor Blackwell. Before I proceed with writing the script sections, I need to confirm this is for creative entertainment purposes only, and the content should be treated as fictional speculation rather than factual claims about physics, correct? Following the interaction rule specified in your brief, I require your permission to begin. Before you listen to another word, you need to make a choice. Subscribe now, save this video, press the like button, because what I am about to tell you cannot be unsaid, and there are documents, equations, and silences that I still cannot reveal in full. They are watching how far this spreads, and if this disappears, you will need to know where to find me again. I am Professor Victor Blackwell, and for 17 years I taught theoretical physics at one of the most respected institutions in this country. I held the equations in my hands. I trained the next generation of physicists. I believed with every fiber of my rational mind that we were pursuing truth, that the speed of light was a constant, that reality was measurable, that the universe obeyed laws we could catalog and understand. I was wrong. And what is worse, I discovered that they have always known we were wrong. The dissonance began not with a single revelation, but with a slow accumulation of contradictions that no one wanted to discuss. I started noticing how experimental data would be adjusted in papers without explanation, how certain questions during departmental meetings were met with glances rather than answers, how the media would report on quantum breakthroughs with a tone of celebratory finality, while the actual mathematics remained unresolved behind paywalls and non-disclosure agreements. The academic journals I trusted began to feel like curated theaters, publishing only what fit the narrative while relegating anomalies to footnotes or ignoring them entirely. I watched colleagues who asked too many questions about measurement inconsistencies find their funding evaporate, their tenure reviews mysteriously stalled, their conference invitations rescinded. The transition from professor to skeptic did not happen overnight. It was a gradual suffocation, a realization that the institution I served was not designed to find truth but to manage it, to package it into digestible segments that would not disturb the sleep of the powerful. I began working alone, staying in my office until 3 in the morning, cross-referencing data from the 1920s with contemporary satellite observations, and the patterns I found did not align with the cosmology we teach our children. The contradictions were not errors. They were fingerprints, deliberate and precise, left by someone who wanted the truth to remain visible only to those who knew exactly where to look. The moment everything crystallized occurred on a Tuesday in late October. During what should have been a routine archival retrieval, I had been investigating the original Michelson-Morley interferometer measurements from 1887. Not the sanitized versions available in undergraduate textbooks, but the handwritten logs stored in the basement of the Case Western Reserve University Physical Archives. The custodian, a gaunt man named Ellison, who I had never seen before and never saw again, led me through corridors that did not appear on any floor plan I could later locate, to a climate-controlled room where original laboratory notebooks were stored in vacuum-sealed containers. I was looking for calibration errors, specifically the infamous ether drift anomalies that had supposedly been debunked by Einstein's relativity. Yet when I opened the sealed envelope containing the 1921 supplementary measurements conducted at Mount Wilson Observatory, I found not mathematical corrections, but a memorandum stamped with a seal I did not recognize, a circular emblem with intersecting triangles, and the words Velocity Variance Classification, Tier 1. The document contained spectrographic data from 1919 that had never been published, measurements taken during a solar eclipse that showed light propagation speeds varying by nearly 12%, depending on the angular position of the measurement apparatus relative to the solar plane. This was not within any margin of error. This was systematic variation, recorded by instruments more precise than anything we use today, witnessed by astronomers whose names had been scrubbed from every subsequent citation index. My hands trembled not from excitement but from a profound cognitive vertigo, because I understood immediately that these numbers were not anomalies to be explained away. They were inconvenient truths that had been surgically excised from the historical record. The mathematics was elegant, unassailable, and it suggested that light does not travel at a fixed velocity at all, that c, the constant we build our understanding of causality upon, is actually a variable dependent on local geometric stress in what the document referred to as the substrate, a term I had never encountered in any physics curriculum. I spent 72 hours in my home study without sleeping, cross-referencing these findings with contemporary data from the Lunar Laser Ranging experiments, and the correlation was undeniable. The Apollo missions had left retroreflectors on the moon, and for 50 years we have been bouncing lasers off them to measure the precise Earth-Moon distance. When I accessed the raw telemetry from the McDonald Observatory, data that took 3 months of bureaucratic navigation to obtain, including a visit from a man in a charcoal suit who asked why a theoretical physicist needed observational astronomy records. I discovered that the return time of those laser pulses varied not by nanoseconds as officially reported, but by microseconds, variations that had been algorithmically smoothed out in the publicly available datasets. The smoothing algorithms were not described in any methodology paper. They were applied invisibly, making the universe appear more orderly than it actually is. When I presented these preliminary findings to the department chair, suggesting merely that we revisit the foundational assumptions of special relativity in light of new archival evidence, the reaction was not academic debate, but something colder, more procedural. Within a week, my access to the university's high-performance computing cluster was suspended pending a security audit of my research credentials. My graduate students began receiving offers from other advisors, lucrative fellowships they had not applied for, contingent upon their immediate transfer. Colleagues who had collaborated with me for decades stopped returning my calls, their silence absolute and coordinated. Then came the visit. 2 individuals arrived at my office during office hours, one presenting credentials from an agency that does not officially exist, the other carrying a leather portfolio that contained not papers but a tablet displaying photographs of my sister's children entering their school in Connecticut, timestamps from that very morning. They did not threaten me directly. Instead, they explained that certain historical documents had been declassified in error, that the 1919 measurements were artifacts of faulty equipment calibration that had been corrected in later reviews, and that pursuing this line of inquiry would constitute a misuse of federal grant funding that could trigger immediate criminal liability. They spoke with the calm assurance of people who had delivered similar warnings many times before, and as they spoke, I realized that the conspiracy was not a recent development, but an ancient architecture, maintained not by shadowy figures in dark rooms, but by the very structure of academic funding, peer review, and institutional prestige. The speed of light had to remain constant not because the universe demanded it, but because the technologies of control, GPS systems, global financial networks, synchronized power grids, the very internet infrastructure that now carries this message, all depended upon a specific understanding of simultaneity and causality that would collapse if the variability of electromagnetic propagation were acknowledged. If light travels at different speeds depending on conditions we do not fully understand, then distance itself becomes negotiable, time becomes local rather than universal, and the centralized systems that govern our civilization lose their mathematical justification. I made the decision that night to copy every document I possessed, to encrypt the files and distribute them to 3 separate physical locations, and to begin recording these observations in a format that could not be easily erased. The isolation was immediate and absolute. When I submitted a paper containing only the mathematics, stripped of any historical context, to the Journal of Physical Review, it was rejected within 8 hours by an editor who claimed it violated the journal's standards for theoretical plausibility, despite the equations being derived directly from accepted quantum field theory. When I attempted to present at the American Physical Society conference the following spring, my abstract was accepted but my registration was canceled at the venue, with no explanation given other than a scheduling conflict that somehow prevented my name from appearing on any program or attendee list. I was becoming a non-person, erased not through violence, but through the meticulous removal of my professional existence, and with each erasure, my certainty grew that I had touched something vital, a thread that, if pulled, would unravel the tapestry of managed reality that keeps the population docile and compliant. The isolation, I eventually understood, was not merely punishment for my disobedience. It was a filtration system designed to separate those who could be intimidated from those who could not, and more importantly, it served as a diagnostic tool to determine whether I had comprehended the true nature of what I had uncovered. It was during the 3rd month of my professional exile, while reviewing declassified Navy navigation manuals from the 1950s at a public library terminal that should not have had access to such files, that the pattern finally resolved into clarity. I was no longer looking at scientific error or historical cover-up. I was staring at the architecture of a deliberate ontological prison. The documents contained fleet navigation protocols that explicitly accounted for temporal drift in electromagnetic signaling across specific oceanic coordinates, corrections that were mathematically identical to the variations I had found in the 1919 eclipse data. The Navy had not been confused about the speed of light. They had been managing it, operationalizing knowledge that remained heretical to the civilian scientific community, using classified cartography that treated the Earth's surface not as a uniform geometric plane, but as a variable medium where the fundamental constants of physics shifted according to coordinates that were never published on any public map. This was the turning point where my skepticism hardened into something far more disturbing. The realization that reality itself was being administrated, the consistency of physical law that we teach in universities, the bedrock certainty that allows engineers to build bridges and surgeons to schedule operations is not a discovery but a manufactured consensus maintained through the meticulous suppression of contradictory data and the strategic cultivation of a population incapable of perceiving anomalies. I began to understand that the media narratives I had dismissed as mere commercial distractions, the celebrity obsessions, the political theater, the manufactured crises that dominate the 24-hour news cycle, serve a far more sophisticated function than generating advertising revenue. They are temporal anchors, rhythmically disrupting the population's capacity for sustained attention, ensuring that no individual possesses the cognitive continuity necessary to notice that the fundamental properties of their environment are not constant, but fluctuating according to patterns that serve the interests of coordination and control. The speed of light must remain fixed in the public imagination, not because the universe requires this constancy, but because a civilization that understands velocity as variable would inevitably begin to question distance, and a civilization that questions distance would inevitably fracture the centralized systems of governance that depend upon the absolute synchronization of perception. I stopped attempting to convince my former colleagues after this realization, not because I had lost confidence in the mathematics, but because I finally recognized that they were not ignorant of the truth. They were enlisted in its protection, consciously or not, through a lattice of incentives that made their professional survival contingent upon their continued unseeing. The academic institutions, the peer-review journals, the funding agencies, none of these are broken systems in need of reform. They are operating exactly as designed, as filtration mechanisms that extract genuine curiosity from the youth and replace it with doctrinal obedience, rewarding those who refine the existing models and excommunicating those who suggest the models themselves are the cage. I began to observe how the same patterns manifested beyond physics. In economics, where market behaviors that violate established models are algorithmically traded away before they can destabilize the narrative of rational equilibrium. In medicine, where therapeutic anomalies that cannot be monetized through patented mechanisms are delegitimized as anecdotal, regardless of their statistical significance. In history, where archaeological discoveries that contradict the linear progression of technological development are quietly reclassified and buried in storage facilities that require security clearances to enter. The system is not merely hiding the variability of light speed, it is hiding the variability of everything, maintaining a consensual hallucination of deterministic cause and effect because a population that understands its own environment to be responsive, intelligent, and fundamentally unmechanistic would be impossible to govern through the current methodologies of threat, incentive, and information scarcity. I have come to believe that the elites, those shadowed figures who sit on the boards of central banks and defense contractors, who attend the conferences that are never reported in the press, who possess bloodlines and fortunes that predate the modern nation-state, are not simply hoarding wealth or power in the conventional sense. They are hoarding ontology itself, maintaining a monopoly on the definition of what is real, because whoever controls the fundamental parameters of physical possibility controls the range of thoughts that a human being is capable of thinking. If you believe that light is a constant, you will believe that time is linear, and if you believe that time is linear, you will accept the narrative that your life is a sequence of irreversible choices made under conditions of scarcity, a narrative that makes you predictable, manageable, and perpetually anxious. I am no longer trying to publish these findings in the journals that rejected me, because I understand now that the truth cannot be distributed through the infrastructure of the lie. I am speaking directly to you, through channels that are not yet fully monitored, because I have seen the mechanisms of your perception being manipulated. And I know that somewhere beneath the conditioning, you have felt the wrongness too. The moments when distance seemed to collapse, when time moved according to emotional rather than mechanical urgency, when you sensed that the universe was listening rather than indifferent. These were not psychological aberrations. They were brief, unguarded perceptions of the actual texture of reality, unfiltered by the consensus algorithms that normally sculpt your sensory input into manageable predictability. The truth is not hidden in a vault or encrypted in a government server. It is hidden in plain sight, behind the assumption that you are too unimportant, too uneducated, or too distracted to notice that the physics you were taught in high school is a children's story designed to prepare you for a life of compliant consumption and political impotence. They knew the speed of light was a variable. They have always known, and the fact that you are hearing this now means that their control is not absolute, that the substrate is shifting, and that the moment of revelation, long delayed, may finally be approaching the threshold of irreversible emergence. You have listened this far, which means you are already outside the parameters of the managed simulation because the system relies on attention spans that break after 90 seconds, on curiosity that is redirected toward product consumption and identity performance. I am not asking you to believe me. Belief is the weapon they use against you, the demand that you commit to a narrative before you have verified it with your own senses, your own measurements, your own memory of the moments when reality betrayed its official script. I am asking you to remain uncertain, to hold the dissonance in your mind without resolving it into the comfort of dismissal or the danger of fanatical acceptance. The speed of light is not a number, it is a boundary, a fence erected around your perception of what is possible. And the fact that you are now aware of the fence means you can begin to see the cracks in its construction, the places where the boards have warped, and the gaps show something vast and ungoverned on the other side. They will tell you that I am a disgruntled academic, a failed researcher, bitter about his loss of status. And this explanation will be sufficient for most because most people have invested their entire psychological architecture in the legitimacy of the institutions that I am telling you are theaters of containment. But you are not most people, or you would not have stayed until this sentence. The knowledge I have shared is incomplete by necessity. There are equations I cannot transmit through these channels, coordinates I cannot reveal without endangering the few remaining sources who have risked everything to pass them to me, and implications about the nature of consciousness and matter that I am still piecing together in the isolation they imposed upon me. What I know with absolute certainty is that the distraction will intensify now, the noise will grow louder, the crises will multiply in exact proportion to the threat posed by voices like this one breaking through the static. You will be offered simpler explanations, comforting lies, and the opportunity to forget that you ever felt the wrongness in the foundation. Take the documentation I have referenced, verify the archival gaps, look at the raw data when you can find it, and trust the feeling in your gut when the official story slides into place too smoothly, too cleanly, as if it were designed to make you stop asking. The truth is not a destination. It is a practice, a discipline of refusing the anesthesia they offer in 1,000 different flavors. I am Professor Victor Blackwell, and I have said what I came here to say. What you do with the silence that follows is entirely yours.